Hi, I'm Trek, and you're watching Game Changer. And thanks to the fact that HBO has made a video game adaptation that was actually good, I get to talk about one of my favorite subjects, video game zombies. Unfortunately, none of the games we're going to talk about today include Pedro Pascal. But what they do include is a lot of really cool ideas that we can bring over to D&D. So let's get started. Zombie media is probably the only thing more infectious than a zombie's bite. Cinema, TV, anime, and of course games, it's kind of everywhere. The body horror appeals to our morbid curiosities and then to our egos. Because yes, this is a chain reaction that will result in the collapse of all human civilization, but you would survive, right? And on top of that, zombies act as a force of nature villain. You don't usually hate the zombies, it's never personal, and zombie media often portrays the humans as the real monsters. But you sure do get to slice and punch and explode a bunch of them, without having to ever feel bad about yourself. One final piece of the equation of why zombies are so popular, in my opinion, is that they're a very versatile plot device. Depending on what flavor of zombie apocalypse your story includes, that story could be about anything. The original Romero zombies were caused by some radiation coming from aliens because it was the Cold War and that's what people were afraid of at the time. In The Last of Us, it's global warming that causes diseases to spread more efficiently than we can contain them. But then you also have games pointing fingers at government-sponsored experiments and media censorship, big corporations chasing profit at any cost, and some nerdy goth kid who summoned demons from hell. Luckily, we can safely assume that this nerdy goth kid did not learn how to raise the undead by playing Dungeons & Dragons, because the zombies we get in D&D are not nearly as fun as the ones we get in any of those games and movies. The zombies in D&D are not a world-ending threat. What they are is a tool. They're animated by some necromancer to do some basic menial tasks, or act as expendable soldiers who will obey any order, no matter how dangerous. They're pretty sturdy thanks to their undead fortitude trait, but that's pretty much all there is to them. In fact, there's only two reasons why creating a zombie is considered evil. The first is that when you raise a zombie, it prevents the person from being brought back to life with spells like Revivify. But to be fair, that probably wasn't in the cards for most people anyway. Those resurrection spells are very expensive and they don't bring someone back to life if they had died from natural causes. So the only people likely to ever experience being brought back to life would be high-level adventurers and maybe some wealthy nobles. The second reason is that, well, you probably wouldn't want a stranger to use the body of a loved one as a tool. In most cultures, that would be extremely disrespectful to your memories of that person. So the crime of necromancy is pretty much on the same level as grave robbing. It's gross, but it's not gonna end the world. In later books, we did get a few apocalypse-prone zombie stat blocks. We've got the Spawn of Chaos and the Zombie Plague Spreader, which do have the ability to create more zombies. Unfortunately, they are pretty powerful creatures, with about 75 hit points worth of zombie. So if you wanted to have players mowing down entire hordes of the undead, these stat blocks are probably not going to be a very good fit for your campaign. Then, in Critical Role's Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, we've got the Husk Zombie, who curse any creature they kill into becoming another member of the Horde. And right now, this is pretty much the best zombie stat block we have in 5e. It has a low challenge rating, so you can throw a bunch of them at your players, but even just one of them could easily end all life in the continent. It's fast, and it even comes with a bloater variant, which tells me it's inspired by video game zombies, not movie zombies. Because yes, the existence of variants is pretty much what separates video game zombies from movie zombies. In a 2-hour movie, if every single zombie is functionally identical, outside of maybe a different face and wardrobe, it's fine. But in a 60-hour long game, the player is probably going to get bored if there's no variety in the enemies that the game throws at them. So in order to fight the repetitiveness, video games have come up with a solution, letting the zombies mutate and evolve into a bunch of different creepy types. Turns out those nerdy-eyed voice actors know a thing or two about zombies. I wonder why. As far as I can tell, this change first appeared when someone working on the first Resident Evil games got to ask the kind of question every game designer dreams to ask. But what if we added tentacles to it? And so they did. The Resident Evil zombies are about as varied as they are terrifying. They can grow claws, spikes, fangs, extra limbs, tongues that can grab you from the other side of the streets, quills that can shoot out from their skin, And if they had stopped there, it would probably be fine. The game would already be plenty scary, but then someone decided that the words pulsating and pustules should go together, and that shoulders should turn into eyes, and that eyes should turn into shoulders. If it sounds like a bad idea, some scientist over at Umbrella Corporation has probably made it happen. Another thing the Resident Evil games do to add variety, because we wouldn't want Jill and Leon to get bored, would we? Is that they don't just turn humans into zombies. They also have undead dogs, crows, crocodiles, sharks, snakes, leeches, and so much more. To represent this in D&D, the easiest way is probably to use a template. You take a stat block you like, let's say the Chimera, and the template tells you what traits to add to turn it into a zombie Chimera. Now, the Dungeon Master's Guide already includes a zombie template, but I've made a new one, which also includes a table of random mutations that whichever poor creature you decided to zombify could have on top of just the Undead Fortitude trait. A while later, Left 4 Dead came out, and it brought us and refined what is pretty much the modern video game zombie formula. Instead of having dozens of different types of infected, Left 4 Dead keeps it to a more manageable and predictable amount. Most zombies are just your regular runners, although there's a lot of them, but every once in a while you do stumble upon one of the 8 types of special infected. You've got the Boomer, which spits stinky bile which attracts nearby hordes and explodes when killed. The Hunter, a fast and sneaky zombie that can climb up walls and pounce on you from a nearby rooftop. The Smoker, who can grab someone from a distance with its tongue and drag them away from its friends. The Tank, an especially tough zombie whose punches can send people flying. The Charger, who runs in, grabs someone, runs out. The Jockey, a small zombie which climbs on the survivor and manipulates it like a puppet. The Spitter, who can cover the ground with a puddle of poison which gives it some area control. And then the Witch, a zombie with claws that can pretty much one-shot you. You can hear a witch sobbing from afar, so you can potentially sneak around it and give it a wide berth. Every member of this roster has a different role, from support to ambush to bruiser, so it's a really good roster to take inspiration from, and a lot of games have done just that. However, while it's great at giving you fun combat encounters, Left 4 Dead can be a little light on story. And this is not a negative criticism, mind you, it's just not the point of the game. But as a result, what we've seen a couple of times later on is that zombie games would come up with lore for how a regular zombie can evolve into those other types of zombies. For example, in The Last of Us you have 4 stages to the infection, and as time passes, the zombies get more and more dangerous. Someone who's just turned becomes a runner. A couple of months later, Cordyceps fungus starts to bloom out of the runner's head and it becomes a stalker. After a couple more months, the fungus hardens, turning a stalker into a powerful clicker. And after a decade or two, a clicker might evolve into a bloater, the most powerful type of infested. So, I've made a small bestiary, which you can find in the video description. It contains a bunch of fun stat blocks and also some lore as to how the different types of zombies come to exist. Another important aspect of how zombies work that you would need to nail down if you want to run a zombie campaign in D&D is how the infection itself works. Movie zombies generally transmit their condition with a single scratch or a single bite, but in the game you usually expect the protagonists to take at least a few hits throughout the many hours we'll spend with them. If every single one of those hits results in a guaranteed game over, it's not exactly going to make for the most engaging gameplay experience, so a lot of games have had to get a bit creative. In a lot of them, the player characters are simply immune to the zombie virus. They are, however, very much not immune to being torn to pieces by the undead hordes, which is convenient, because it lets those games use good old hit points to keep things simple. This might sound like a bit of a cop-out, but it does come with a few interesting plot hooks. The first is that maybe those immune characters might actually be asymptomatic carriers, which means they will be outcasts, banned from entering quarantine zones, maybe even hunted down by other survivors as they represent an existential threat to the uninfected. The second plot hook is that maybe a vaccine can be created from their blood, so they hold the key to saving the world. They just have to get that key in the hands of the right people, usually by going on a fun little road trip through some zombie-infested wastelands. And speaking of vaccines, there are at least 2 games that do actually feature a cure for the zombie virus, and they're pretty interesting for it. The first is Dying Light, a game where you get bit in a cutscene during the first 5 minutes of the game. From then on, and for the rest of your probably very short life, you need to regularly administer yourself a serum called Antizin in order to stay human. But there's not exactly an infinite amount of the stuff, and you're not exactly the only one who needs it. so maybe you'll have to go on a mission to recover extra doses. Or maybe you'll have to steal those doses from people who need them less than you do. The second game, which features a cure, is State of Decay. In that game, you can craft a cure by using 5 plague samples, a strange mutated organ that you can harvest from the most powerful variant zombies in the game. So just by the method of how the cure is created, the game gives you an adventure hook. You will have to go out of your way to retrieve those plague samples, and even then, it's only a cure, not a vaccine. So it will cure you of the last bite you've suffered, but you'll have to use another dose the next time you get bitten. Another possibility is that anyone who dies, for any reason, not just bites, rises as a zombie. The bites just help you die faster. Now this is something that is pretty much only seen in The Walking Dead, but they have video games, and pretty good ones at that, so I'm legally allowed to talk about them and there's nothing you can do to stop me. This is actually my preferred way of handling infection in Dungeons & Dragons. This method has the advantage that it keeps things very simple, while also explaining why the player characters have survived so far. The zombies have gotten everyone else, but if anyone's still alive now, it's because they're a certified badass. And that includes the player characters, which fits the general fantasy superhero vibe that D&D is all about, but it also includes any rival survivor NPCs that they might encounter. DMs, make of that what you will. One last option for infection is that, yes, a single zombie bite is, in fact, a death sentence. This is what happens in The Last of Us and The Walking Dead. The way it works mechanically is that you have hit points, but you only get to use them when you're fighting against other people. The zombies, on the other hand, do not attack your hit points. Instead, against the infected, you mostly use time as a resource. The weaker type of infected have to grapple you for about 5 seconds before they can bite you, and during that time, Ellie or some other ally can swoop in and save your butt. But for the second stage of infection, the Stalker, which is stronger, you only have about 2 seconds before it chomps your neck. And for a Clicker, you don't even have a full second, so in most cases, if one gets a hold of you, it's game over. This is easy enough to reproduce in D&D. The first attack grapples you, the second attack restrains you, and the third attack bites you. Runners get 1 attack, Stalkers get 2, Clickers get 3. But what's important to understand here is that while The Last of Us has combat encounters, it's also much more of a stealth-based game than D&D. And there's a lot that goes into how to create a good stealth game. So much so that I might have to dedicate entire videos about the subject. For example, that's the reason why clickers click. By having this distinctive noise, the game announces when there's a clicker around. You'll always know about the clicker before the clicker knows about you. This gives you an opportunity to hide, observe, make a plan, and then, hopefully, execute it without being seen by the clicker. Or the 5 runners next to it. Or that one stalker that you didn't see because it was hiding behind a corner. But even if they do find you, it's usually possible for you to run away and try again without having to go through a game over screen. It's really important to have these degrees of failure in a stealth game, because otherwise you get a die and retry type gameplay, which wouldn't really work for a game where you're supposed to get attached to the characters you're playing. And speaking of player characters, let's get a bit into what survivors can do in a zombie apocalypse situation. Generally speaking, zombie games are divided into 2 subgenres: survival horror games and horde shooters. In survival horror games, like these, it's all about scavenging. You need to find food, either for yourself or for your community of survivors, and you have a limited amount of ammo and medical supplies. Pretty common for a lot of D&D tables to ignore tracking rations and ammunition, but for this kind of campaign specifically, it might be a good idea to actually track those things for once. By doing that, you turn them from something that detracts from the plot into something that is the focus of the plot. There's also an optional rule in D&D for that kind of gameplay. The gritty realism rule. Short rests take a full night and long rests take a full week. The effect this has is that you can't rely on spells like Good Berry or Create Food and Water anymore. Another way to represent the scarcity of a survival horror campaign is to remove vendors. You don't just go buy some more arrows when you run out. You have to find more, craft more, or negotiate a trade where you have to give up something that's probably just as valuable as arrows would be. Now in horde shooters, on the other hand, you've got games like World War Z or Call of Duty Zombies, where it's all about building traps and fortifications, and then letting wave after wave of zombies crash into your defenses, and hoping that it holds. Usually it won't, but that's part of the fun. But this is also easy to translate into D&D mechanics. You give your players a battle map and then you tell them they have 15 build points. Barricades cost 1 point, a ballista costs 3 points, etc. Then you just kind of let your players be creative and use the environment in fun ways. And then you throw an entire horde, something with a challenge rating they should never be able to handle, and you watch them pull it off somehow. It's pretty glorious. And with that last piece of the puzzle, I think we have a pretty good campaign toolkit for a nice little zombie apocalypse campaign. There's a lot more about zombies that I probably couldn't cover in this video, but what I did cover, I put it all in a PDF. That's it for today's video. It's only the second one on this channel, so make sure you tell me what you think in the comments below, to help me figure out the format that works best for this channel. Then, if you also want to help me bribe the almighty algorithm, make sure to drop a like and a subscribe. You can also join my Discord channel if you want to chat and get some sneak peeks at what I'm working on next. But until then, have a good one.